So, yeah, my name's David Beaumont. I have been doing lean for quite some time. I actually started off with Darryl. Darryl and I were talking this morning. I said, "You remember the first time I met you?" He's like, But in '91, when going to Poly, I did a co-op at Numi. Darryl was at Numi, he was running their paint shop. And when you come in as a newbie into Toyota's world, the first thing they do is say, "You got to learn how to problem solve." So I go into Darryl's shop and said, "I'm supposed to solve why we're having more paint defects on light colored vehicles as opposed to dark colored vehicles. So I'm going to do my little engineering thing." And he goes, "Yeah, right. You're going to go stand out in the paint shop in where they're painting and then come back and see me at the end of the day." That's the first time I met Darryl. So I spent 6 years at Toyota. After about 97, I joined McKinsey and Company, which is a management consulting firm. I don't know, anybody know McKinsey? Usually we don't. Oh, good, there's a few. And basically did lean in every place other than automotive for 10 years. And my role at McKinsey was basically operations transformation work. And for some crazy reason, I wanted to do it with companies like pulp and paper, metals and mining. So I did pulp mills in northern Finland and South America. I did coal mining. I was surface mining, underground mining. I did jet engine overhauls, and I did glass bottles. I did banking and healthcare, and just a number of things. It was just great. It's just a great way to take what you learned at Toyota and really try to make it happen in other companies in completely different industries. From all those examples, and I could give you a bunch more. It's kind of funny. I walk around locations. It's like, yeah, I've worked on aerial lift platforms and construction glass and carpets, and so I've had a good chance to really try to take what Toyota's done and apply it to other industries. And then I was working, so McKinsey for 10 years, you're basically gone 4 days a week, every week. So for 10 years, I'd leave on Monday, come back Thursday, and my home is basically California. I was doing projects out of northern Finland, flying from Cleveland, all this craziness that's going on as a consultant, and had an opportunity to do ag in California. So I figured, well, I haven't done ag, done a lot of different stuff, but lean in agriculture, what could be better if you're a California person to go do some lean in ag? So I worked for Roll Global for the last 5 years. They own, we have 125,000 acres of farmlands between basically Modesto and Bakersfield. Palm Wonderful, BG Water, Clementines, a Cuties brand that's out, Oranges, Lemons, Nabels, Teleflora, a bunch of companies. It's just a privately held portfolio of companies. So I basically have been their ops transformation guy for the last 5 years. And then I've just rejoined McKinsey because I guess I like travel. So it's a great company, a lot of fun. So, Darryl.
How's that? Is that okay? Yeah. Well, my name is Darryl Sturdivant, and a year and a half ago, I retired from the Toyota Motor Corporation, where I'd spent the previous 25 years. And then my dad worked for General Motors for 35 years. He's plant manager, so when I was a kid, I was a little bit like a military brat. We lived in this state, lived in that state, lived all over the United States. Everybody that we associated with was from the automotive industry. Every kid I played with, father, worked for GM or Ford or Chrysler. So when I graduated from college, the last thing I ever wanted to do was have anything to do with automotive manufacturing. And when I started my first job with General Motors, I learned that that's really not what I wanted to do, at least not at that time. I kicked around, went to Silicon Valley. I had 3 goals when I graduated from college. I wanted to work for a large corporation. I wanted to work for a medium-sized corporation. I wanted to work for a small corporation, a startup, where I could do everything. I did that, and at the time, this is in the mid-'80s, General Motors and Toyota were establishing a joint venture. And there's a whole history behind the joint venture. GM was not Toyota's first choice. The first choice of Toyota was actually Ford Motor Corporation. Ford was making so much money then, they had no interest in dealing with Toyota. GM, on the other hand, wasn't doing quite so well, and they saw that they were losing market share. It was after the oil embargo, and they had a need for fuel-efficient cars. So I started with Toyota in actually it was late 1988, I guess it was. And throughout my 25 years of experience, I worked in plant operations, I worked in painting, engineering, production control, finance. I was vice president of human resources for a few years. In the early 2000s, I was in charge of the global introduction of the past model Corolla Matrix and Pontiac Vibe in the United States, Canada, Japan, China, South Africa, as well as TM UK in England. And for the last 6 years of my employment, I was president of Toyota's Canadian operations and so forth. And I only tell you all that because what I want to do today is I worked in all those areas in executive functions and so forth. So I want to make this as meaningful for you as I possibly can. So if you have any question as we go through this on anything, even if you think it's an area outside of the venue of this meeting, please ask it, because we can probably come up with a pretty reasonable, good answer for you and so forth. Had a lot of fun, had a lot of exposures, and about a year and a half or so ago, I took a retirement, not really retirement, more a recess than anything else. I'm kind of recharging. And Dave told me that he was doing this, and he said, would you like to do it? And I said, yeah, I'll come down. They promised me really good weather, so I drove down from Northern California last night.
That was the easy part.
Yeah. Anyway, that's me. And thank you, and I very much appreciate being here today.
So here's what we're going to try to do, because we want to make this pretty interactive. The description of our backgrounds, I mean, I am not a lean zealot, either is Darryl. So the description Darryl just gave of the different positions he held in Toyota, there's a very specific reason. That's not an uncommon thing within Toyota, and that's what we want to bring out today is we know it's a basics kind of one-on-one course. You know, we want to make sure that you understand the tools that are out there, what everybody's talking about, and we're going to go into that as well as the systems that make Toyota pretty interesting. But I don't, in my role at Roll Global, I didn't call it lean for a very specific reason. I didn't call it Six Sigma either. How many people are Six Sigma folks? Six Sigma. And how many are lean folks? Okay, so I don't call either one of those now, and you'll probably get this, those that have had exposure to it, because every time you talk to somebody about Six Sigma or lean, they have a certain impression of what that is, right? What does that mean to you, or what book you read, what experience you've had. And so if you look at Toyota, we never called ourselves lean either. It was never lean within Toyota's language. You didn't say, okay, we're going to go do lean. You had different activities that you'd run and talk about problem solving, this, that. But we had a number of stories. You're walking through, I was walking through the stamping shop at Toyota with a GM book and Darryl. And the GM official says, why doesn't Toyota do Six Sigma? And Darryl says, well, you might want to tell him what you said, Darryl.
We have process control everywhere, you know, upper mean, lower mean, trend analysis and so forth. We actually looked at Six Sigma. Toyota is a very reflective company. We're always trying to make ourselves better. Our competition is ourselves. And so we looked at GE, we looked at Six Sigma, and we kind of dismissed it. Maybe we caused that as basically a subset of everything we're actually doing. So, and he's got a good memory. This is 20-some years ago. As we were walking along, I went through and I was showing them all of the trend analysis, all of the charts, and all the analysis that we were doing. And so we were doing it. We just didn't call it Six Sigma.
But, you know, Toyota hands out the statistical tools to all the new engineers. You have to be trained on it. It makes sense. Datum control, you're going to do it. So Toyota is doing it. I think the important thing to take out of this is you basically want to learn every best practice you can from whatever anybody's doing. And Toyota doesn't bury its head in the sand. They're always up here looking. And you certainly will have your companies that you say, you know what, they're doing something interesting. You know, Nike Just Do It I use all the time. You know, Toyota, we called it Chimera, become the part. Don't, you know, analysis paralysis forever. At some point, just try it, see if it works. Fails, fine, you know, move forward. But you're doing something instead of waiting forever. And zealots on either side of the table doesn't help, right? If you're pure Six Sigma and you want to study everything, and I've run into folks like that before, boil the ocean before you actually try something. Or if you're pure Toyota and you're going to plan forever before you do something, right? I mean, there's a lot of different similarities you can catch from it. So we're going to give you as much flavor of what lean is, and we want to have the questions come back on, you know, any kind of tool or anything that you've heard to kind of breathe some life into it. And then at the end of the last session, we're going to be making these very high-tech airplanes to make sure we meet production. So we're going to go through a little simulation at the end. Very lean in Toyota. We don't need to bring a bunch of materials to present to you. So feel free, like Darryl said, to ask any questions as we go through. So initially, we're going to go through some of the basics. Again, we want to make sure you walk out of here. Somebody says, do you know lean? Right? Okay, yeah, we know lean. We've heard it, heard all the tools and techniques. It sounds like a lot of folks in here already have that. So we have a broad group. So it's going to be interesting how we navigate through the interaction. But more interaction, better. Then we're going to go through some, so the first one will just be, let's just talk a little bit about the history. Everybody's kind of got it. Where did it develop come from? Different companies took different spins on it. Everybody, like every new CEO, wants to put their own fingerprints on it. We'll talk about that because, why is there 6S versus 4S versus 5S, that kind of stuff that's going on. Why DMAIC 5-step problem versus PDCA 6-step. We'll get into some of those things. Then we're going to go through some of the different company examples, and we'll give you some history of that. And then we run I like to use assessments just to bring the clarity of some of the tools. So we'll go through a couple pages, depending on timing, on if we're looking at, say, production control, and you're looking at fork trucks, and you want to evaluate how well you do conveyance. And, there's a little audit, so just bring some of the tools home. And then we'll run the simulation. We want to leave enough time in the end to just debate as a group. But again, this is how much interaction you all spend in the assessment. We kind of like a real example from one of the companies. So if we say, let's talk about new product development as one of the elements of a world-class engineering quality group. It would be great if we can pick an example from one of your companies and we could just talk about it. If we don't, then we'll use one of ours, and Darryl and I would be talking too much. So that's the choice of the group. But let's go through some of this first. Any questions before we get started, or any particular topic, Eric?
David, I noticed I left my name tag up there on the front there, so I think I'm being misrepresented.
Well, it's all right. I'll do all the bad stuff in the beginning, and then I'll put mine
I
on
also
mine
want to
in the end.
encourage people, maybe if you want to go ahead and put your name on this little yellow sheet. And one of the things I did that I think is very neat.
Before you go into this, let me say one thing.
It's important for the speaker to know who you are, maybe even some of the people behind you to know who you are.
Yeah, one thing I was going to mention before we start, we're going to go through a lot of terms. We're going to talk about, I'd say you got Gemba back there, Genji Genbutsu, Kamishibai, standardized work, Rogan. I don't think we're going to talk about JKK, but we're going to go through a lot of concepts and so forth. And a couple things I want to kind of illustrate for you. I don't really know lean. I know TPS inside and out. So you're going to have to constantly ground me. I'm going to start using Japanese words and so forth. So if you don't know what it means, ask me and I'll convert. I'm bilingual. I can speak English also. But the other thing is, when we go through this, within Toyota, we read all these books that people write about us. And there's a couple things you need to know. We don't read the whole book. We kind of glance at them. 50% of the stuff in the books we never did. The other 50% of the stuff that you read about in the book, we may have done, but we did it like 15 years ago, and lives move on from that. And within Toyota, at the higher levels of Toyota, we refer to TPS. You think of TPS as what, Toyota Production System? Yeah? Within Toyota, it's referred to as a thinking person system. So TPS, when you take all the tools, and Dave's going to go through all the tools with you, it really boils down to a couple things: leadership and people. And the cornerstone, or the pillars of the Toyota Production System, or the thinking person system, is continuous improvement and respect for people, or developing people to do that. And I was at Berkeley. I was told Dave was at Berkeley, and these business graduates, they were talking about what they wanted to do when they got out. They wanted to make money. They wanted to do philanthropic things. They wanted to do community. And because I asked them, why are you guys going to go in business? And they gave me all these answers. And I said, the only reason you should go in business, there's only one reason, and that's to make money. And they said, well, Toyota, you guys train. We train. We don't make money so that we can train. We train so that we can make more money. Okay? And you can only do all those wonderful things with community relations, environmental things, and so forth, if in fact you're making a profit. Okay? So the focus, big picture, will always be on leadership and people development, all the rest of this stuff, but these are just tools to be able to do those types of things, okay?
And so how many of you have seen this book, The Machine That Changed the World? Pretty common book out there. It was basically Walmack and Jones. Walmack I actually have spent time with. So MIT decides to do a research project, studies Toyota, gets access to them, and tries to describe what it is they see. So lean's coined out of that discussion. But what's interesting when you talk to Walmack about, and he's actually on the executive panel now, and John Shook is running the Lean Enterprise. I don't know if anybody knows it, but that's what developed. They do a lot of publications, they do a lot of great training, a lot of good, interesting research. But if you talk to Walmack about trying to replicate what Toyota does, which is why we're all here studying it, it's very difficult to describe, right? And that's why when you get into what we're going to share today, it's really about doing it. At the end of the day, a lot of this is just get out there and do the observation, do the direct problem solving, Genchi Genbutsu, go look, go see. That's very much the philosophy of Toyota, and there is a profit behind it. So it's all this negativity around things. When you try to look at it, all the things you see, that's just the surface level stuff. It really isn't what makes Toyota Toyota. What makes Toyota Toyota, when I talk to clients about how do you get the 1,000 people you have working for you all thinking, how do I make this better every single day? That's a real challenge. It's really hard to get to that point. And Toyota doesn't have that either. You go down the line and there's going to be 50 people on a team. 40 of them are going to be energized about problem solving. 10 aren't. And that's okay. And Toyota's world says that's fine. But you're still going to work within the rules. You're going to still work under the way we process. We're still going to give you trust and respect, but we're not going to expect that. So the book's decent, but that's really what it was trying to do is give a picture of what basically this educational study of looking at Toyota and what was observed. Whoops. And so some of this is just a description of, how does Toyota go after, everything is problem solved around what's wasteful in the company, what doesn't drive value, what isn't giving you a profit. And how do we make sure that everybody can see a little better? So all these tools and stuff, really you can look at it, comes out of the problem solving approach, and we'll share which tools kind of we're trying to get at what nail, what we're trying to hit it. But this is how they described it. Pursuing streamlining throughout the entire organization, total elimination of waste. Not that dissimilar to Six Sigma, zero waste, go after it. What are all the wastes? How do you see it? What are the voices of the customer? What does the customer want? How do we make sure that gets back into our processes?
Yeah, the Toyota started out as automatic loom manufacturer. And I know Akio quite well, and he told me it was his grandfather is the one that started the organization. And he started it up because he didn't want he used to watch his mother actually make the looms by hand, so he designed it. During the Second World War, Toyota was the largest supplier of Japanese trucks and vehicles for the military effort. At the conclusion of the Second World War, Japan was decimated. And what a lot of people don't know is that Chrysler was put together with Mitsubishi. Ford was put together with Toyota, and General Motors was put together with Nissan to be able to develop them and so forth. Toyota was very, very tiny, and in 1957, this isn't on the chart, they shipped their first vehicles to the United States. They were terrible. It's okay. Yes, ma'am.
When you say put together, what does that mean?
Japanese, at the time, during the Second World War, the GM, Ford, and Chrysler, as a matter of fact, my dad started working for GM at the conclusion of the Second World War, and they're still manufacturing military equipment. So they wanted to rebuild the Japanese industry, and so to do that, they wanted the Japanese to learn from American automotive manufacturers how to build a modern automobile, because they figured by making them self-sufficient, it'd be better for the Japanese economy rather than us doing a Marshall-type plan in Japan like we did in Europe to support them. So they were put together. And actually, that's a very good question, because I mentioned earlier that when Toyota first came to North America, they approached Ford about a joint venture. And the Ford joint venture was going to be, you guys know where Pico Rivera is at? It's an automotive plant down here, and there was another plant up in Milpitas, California. Ford, and because Toyota had a long relationship with Ford going back to, prior to the Second World War, during the Second World War, when they were trying to learn how to make vehicles, and they were a big admirer of the Rouge plant. At the time, in the early 80s, Ford was just minting money. So they had absolutely no interest to learn from Toyota because there's nothing to learn. At that point, a guy by the name of Bill Ushery, who was a former Secretary of Labor for Jimmy Carter and for actually Gerald Ford also, approached Roger Smith at GM about a joint venture with Toyota, and that's how the whole framework of the conversation came together, and that's how they developed and so forth. The first vehicles that Toyota shipped to North America were rust buckets. They leaked, and every single one of them broke down on the American highway. And Toyota bought all the vehicles back, loaded them back on a ship, and he vowed never to ship the vehicles back to the United States until such time as he could be proud of the quality vehicle they produced. Go to the next. And this is kind of a time frame what I talked about right here. They went bankrupt in about 1950, and they had to lay off a bunch of workers. I think it was 6,000. And at that time, the management of Toyota Motor Corporation was basically turned over to Taiichi Ohno. And then this goes through in the 70s, the oil embargo hit, 73. I was a petroleum engineer in 73. I was working at a gas station when the gas crisis hit. So I'd go to work every morning and be miles of cars waiting to get a tank of gas. Most of you are probably too young to remember that though, yeah? Yeah. Anyway, Toyota took over, did very well. In 1982, General Motors had a super plant in Fremont, California. It was, at the time it was built in 1963. It was the world's largest plant under one roof. And it was shut down because it was the worst plant General Motors had in the world for quality. Cost was deplorable. Union management relationships were pathetic. There was alcoholism, drug abuse. They even had a Winnebago that came in the parking lot and had prostitutes at lunchtime and so forth. So they shut the plant down in 82. In 84, that plant was chosen to be the joint venture between General Motors and Toyota. The plant started up with the exact same workforce that was laid off, with the exact same union that was disbanded, with a different concept, teamwork, mutual trust and respect and so forth. And then when the first vehicle they produced, this is a plant that had the worst quality in the entire world, General Motors. The first year that they produced a car, they were number 2 in J.D. Power. And then from that point on, they did extremely well. Toyota was admired, moved through here. We opened up in 88, we built a plant in Kentucky. In 89, we built a plant in Cambridge, Ontario, Canada. Built another one in Vancouver. And so about every 2 years, we added a plant throughout North America. And then these are the concepts. You go through all this. The Toyota cars were hard to find. How many people here have been to Japan? A lot. Would you say there's a lot of wide open space and so forth? Okay. When you read the books, they talk about just in time and so forth. When you talk to Toyota, I worked for a guy who was and you'll see Cho here in a second. I worked for Mr. Cho. And I worked for a guy by the name of Nampuchi Hayashi. And Cho and Hayashi are the only 2 living students of Ono. And they told me that the real reason for just-in-time is in Japan. They had no place to store anything. And there's no warehousing space. They didn't have the amount of money that they needed. So that was the brain trust that drove just-in-time. And then quality, same thing drove quality too. I mean, Jidoka. You guys know what Jidoka means? Jidoka means build quality in station the first time. So you want to send a perfect product to your customer. And your customer is the person that works after you in the assembly line. And that's the concept that goes throughout. Because if you go back to, in the 70s, the big thing was the Japanese were doing QC circle activity. That was supposedly the Japanese secret or the Toyota secret and so forth. The QC circles was nothing other than taking extremely complex problems, and we still do that today, and resolving them using, Toyota uses 8-step problem solving, use 6-step, 4-step, but the concept is the same. But the reason is they didn't have the resources nor the real estate to be able to tie up tons of time and effort and money into reworking things that should have been right the first time around. Now there's a new concept that I haven't even told him about. It's called JKK. It's called Ryokan, Jokin, it means perfect process, perfect person, perfect environment, perfect equipment, perfect every time. So you design a perfect environment to produce perfection every single time. And then the last one was, you're talking about gross targets set by Mr. Toyota, continuous improvement or Kaizen. And then continuous improvement, remember I said earlier, there's two fundamental foundations for Toyota Production System. There's two fundamental foundations for lean. It's continuous improvement and respect for people or development of people. And Dave's going to tell you that 80% of the companies that do lean initiatives fail. And the 80% and 100% of the 80% that fail because they don't develop in the development of the people and the human element and so forth. That's key fundamental foundation. The other thing he said earlier is that, you know, if Toyota's got 50 people on the line, maybe 40 of them are engaged, 10 are, you know, usually it's not all 10, but, you know, eight are kind of ambivalent, and you got 2 that are passive aggressive. So what we do is we focus all of our efforts on the 40 that are trying to do the right thing, and we forget about the other 10. And we figure that the good efforts and optimism of the 40 that are working hard will drag the other ones with them. And it actually does work, which is much different than it was when I worked at General Motors. We didn't have 40 people that were engaged in the process, but say we had 2 bad apples, we spent all of our time focused on trying to get the 2 bad apples turned the other direction, and guess what? We just took the good apples and made them bad because that was the only way you could get any attention.
Yeah, the other thing we did is every time we went out to the line, we watched the laziest person.
Yeah.
Because the laziest people always show you the most efficient way to do the job. Yeah. It was classic, you know. So the ones that really didn't want to participate, that's who we watched. And you found all kinds of great improvements. So, you know, if you look across companies, and I've seen a lot of these, right, of how we describe our manufacturing system. This is Toyota's house, so you see it everywhere. And Darryl was talking about the just-in-time, Jidoka, flexible manpower, the strategy on the top, and the foundational elements. Don't do anything without standard work. And Toyota was like, look, how do you do improvements on something that's going to change tomorrow? So standard work, most efficient, always having continuous improvement, our problem-solving process, and stability of resource. If you have fluctuating quality, you can't do standard work either. You can't have standard work. So, but this is the basic house you'll see describing Toyota. But I guarantee you, if you in your own companies have a description of how you describe your production system, I've seen everything from somewhat nice and structured to every buzzword in the world being on one page and being told that this is the way we do operational excellence. So there's a bunch of different ways. As you understand the Toyota house, and it moves, as Darryl is saying, you might have caught from this, is if today it looks like this, tomorrow it won't. You know, but fundamentally underneath it, what Toyota does do is the philosophy and the culture stays the same. So when I was there to get certified in standard work, to be able to be a trainer of standard work within Toyota, is basically a 5-step process. You're just a participant in the class. Then you start taking little pieces of the class. You know, take maybe the first 20%. And eventually you get to the end, and there's a panel of judges sitting across the back, and you present it all yourself, and they deem you worthy or not to present it. So that's getting certified. But then one of the things that happened while I was there was that PowerPoint started coming around, and we still had these green transparencies going on. And the lead trainer at the NUMMI plant wanted to change standard work. He put some things in there to kind of make it his own. And you would have thought this guy stole from the company. You know, stole a few vehicles, had them in his backyard. Because the Toyota came down, the training organization from corporate said, you don't change the way we think and train people on a standard like this. There's a very structured way we go about training, to the simple things of takt time being production rate. Well, you can't say production rate. To me, it was told it's the heartbeat of the plant. That's how Toyota wants it described. This isn't just a number. This is the pace and the heartbeat of the plant. You're going to feel this happening as you walk through the plant. And you can see it when you actually start thinking that way. So there's a very specific way of training that Toyota wants to go across. So there's some hard and fast rules. At the same time, being very willing to change and add, as long as it's a consensus of the group that makes sense to include in our program. So this is the Toyota house.
No, this house is the house of the production system.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's the other point. And I think what you will see is these things, right? When you walk through the Toyota plant, you can see a lot of this activity, the problem solving going on, the standard work charts up above people's heads, the very visual factory that's out there, the engagement and the problem solving. But behind that is the systems, and that's what we're going to attempt to get across today is, okay, we're going to talk about all the tools, we're going to show you what's out there, and then we're going to talk about the systems. So if you walked into a production control department, what are the 6 things you should see? You know, to kind of tell you, yeah, they're doing enough to put the systems in place that say, okay, a visual route, a spaghetti diagram of your fork trucks makes sense.
This is self-evident. This just shows Toyota's growth in terms of operational excellence in the automotive industry and so forth, being number 1. And then showed market cap at 101 billion euros through 2008. I think market cap now is about $285 billion, something like that. So we actually, during the global economic meltdown, unfortunately I was involved in that. You know, we had, in my last year and a half working for Toyota, we had the global economic meltdown. Then we had the cash for clunkers. Then we had the unintended acceleration. Then we had an earthquake, tsunami, and a radiation leak. But I can tell you throughout all that, we spun on a dime, and the year in global economic meltdown, we actually made $1.1 billion. And we originally were projecting a loss of about $5 billion. Very, very flexible organization. And then this just shows quality. Toyota focuses, you know, being true to yourself, Toyota focuses on 2 things, and they believe these 2 things will drive everything else. First thing, safety. Second thing is quality. We believe that if you build a very high quality product, you'll do it with a very low cost and usually pretty good safety result and so forth, and a very high productivity and so forth.
Yeah, and I think the difference though, Darryl, when you're talking about the quality point, high quality the first time. So I went into an automotive plant, non-Toyota, and every 5th vehicle was being put in the hospital for rework. That would have caused, literally, it would have been chaos at Toyota. Every senior leader would have been down on the line trying to figure out what the heck was going on. And it was, I asked, I said, wow, what's going on today? You know, 20% defects, you guys must be, you know, really upset. And they looked at me strange, you know, like this must, you know, this is normal. And another manufacturer of another product I was at recently, there was clearly all kinds of defects, scrap, and I asked what the scrap number was. And it was like, well, we don't throw anything away. There's no scrap. But 80% of the labor was there doing rework. You know, 80% of the work being done was reworking that. So there's a lot that goes behind it when you're really trying to create, obviously, a very high quality vehicle, and that gets to the cost point. You can I think it was Mercedes, when you look at the amount of rework in a Mercedes as opposed to a Toyota, 3 times?
Yeah, no, more.
More.
I went to their, it's in Stuttgart. I went to the plant, and they repair everything. After stamping, they have a big repair operation. After body weld, big repair operation. Plastics, paint, trim, chassis, final assembly. It's unbelievable how much repair they actually do.
Yeah. So I don't know what different companies we have sitting in the room. I didn't look at everything, but obviously Lean has gone out, or Lean, Six Sigma, all the improvement companies that are looking to improve are going to reach out and look for any kind of good improvement technique. But it's literally gone across a number of industries, and you can see the success. The reason I said 80%, it's more than 80% actually, but if you say how much we're successful taking Lean and putting it into their organization, Lean is sticking. You see the visuals, you see the engagement, they have a problem-solving approach, they're getting the impact that we saw on the previous slides. That's where that 20% come from. You know, 20% can do that, and it sticks. But do they really get all the way into the outside of what you see to the whole performance management process? That it really goes into everybody knows whether they had a good day or a bad day. Does everybody know from metrics on the wall, or do you have a quick discussion around performance in 15 minutes or 5 minutes in the morning because it's so clear, you have the numbers and the data matters? Do people actually want to come into work in the morning because they care about the culture and they feel like they belong? Do they have engineering and sales, marketing, and engineering operations all work seamlessly together and have a plan to launch a product? I mean, all those things behind the scenes, then you say, well, there's much fewer than that, even that 20% that really have achieved that. So anybody want to talk specifically about their company? Like what it is that you think is lean would bring into the company? Any debate you want to have or just questions on, okay, look, if you were walking in, and we've done this a lot, when you just, the beauty of not knowing a company, it's like I walk into a pulp mill. The first time I walked into a pulp mill, I had no idea how the heck that product was made. But you can, just going in with a different, you know, when you're biased in the Toyota world of every time you walk out to something, you need to look for what's driving the value. It makes it pretty easy to look smart walking through a process because you just ask really stupid questions that lead to pretty interesting results. So.
You know, I think that you all know about the budget situations in the state of California, and one of the ways that really we have to save costs really is to either collaborate or reduce waste, and lean is a perfect way to achieve that goal. We are consistently asked to do more with less, and as people retire or leave company, we're less able to replace that resources, and so we have to find ways to do more with less, and find ways to improve our processes, basically.
Yeah.
You know, that's a good point, and I was going to mention earlier that one graph he had up there is Toyota makes more than cars. They also make trucks. They also are the largest home producer in Japan. They run the phone company in Japan. They run Narita Airport. They run the New Nagoya Airport as well. They also make speedboats, airplanes, that type of thing. But I've been working with Alameda County up in Northern California, and we've been utilizing lean to be able to reduce costs so they can meet their budgets. And so one thing that they're working on, to your point, is they're doing a thing that Toyota used to do called integrated single function. So it used to be every city has their own fire department, every city has their own police department, every city has their own fleet of vehicles for road maintenance, for that type of thing. So what they're doing is they're consolidating operations. So you like in Alameda County, you got Livermore, Pleasant, and Dublin fire. So they haven't eliminated any firemen or women or any policemen or women, but what they've done is reduce the infrastructure to support. They own IT groups, own each group, all that type of thing, and they found it beneficial. So that's a very valid point going forward. I also did some work with the United States Air Force, and you know they were talking about this sequester and falling off the financial. Nobody here is in the Air Force, are they? No, good. I was with a bunch of generals, and I was listening to them talk, and they could easily reduce their budgets by 30%, and it wouldn't affect the efficiency at all just by eliminating waste. It's the most wasteful thing I've ever been around. So that, I think, is a very good point you made.
Speaking of generals, it seems like that the buy-in can't come from anything except the top. I mean, this needs to be a top-down.
Yeah. No.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, you
So.
can't just send your second in command
Right.
to this thing and go.
When I was contemplating joining Roll, so here's a billionaire running this company. Well, he has 12 companies, and I did a presentation on how do companies roll out a transformation program across a portfolio of companies. So being at McKinsey, we work with global companies, and they generally have plants all over the world. So got some experience there. And I said, there's a few things required for me to take this position. One is you have to own this thing. I mean, you have to really own it and stand behind it. And after the first year at the president's meeting, I put up a chart that showed basically a framework that said, down the bottom left-hand corner, there are people that are leaders that are blocking this. They're in the red. And on the far top right corner, they're actually leading it. And I said, so where all the presidents, where do you guys think we are? Where do we rank ourselves? Nobody would raise their hand, right? No one wanted to say anything. But Stuart, the owner, goes, well, I think I'm in the top corner, far right corner. I'm given all the resources. I'm supporting this. I'm backing it. I'm like, what one problem-solving event have you led in the last year? Because I had tried to get him out there to lead stuff. 0. And so we drop him down. But I mean, in Toyota, and you can go through this, Darryl, a little bit, you don't get to be that leadership position without understanding all those roles and how they work and what they expect, and they're very active leaders. So one of the problems in the US that I've gone through working in consulting is how often the CEO changes. So it's not like they don't want to drive improvements, but everyone wants to put their own fingerprints on it, call it something different, drive something else, and that's a real problem. So yeah, I think it's not necessarily top-down driven, but it's definitely has to be top-down supported, right? And then actively engaged. And the level of leadership involvement, one of the first things I did in Palm is a 100% pomegranate juice company, was remove all the offices. We had one desk with all the leaders sitting there. It was like, forget open door, it was no door policy, that you can interact and react. And we have a profile of leaders. So if you look at your leaders in your company and you look at the amount of time the leadership is spending on direct problem solving, performance management discussions, just any discussion on performance versus developing their talent, and administrative, what you'll likely find is that administrative is like 65% plus. And it makes no sense that the most senior people in your company is not giving that knowledge back out to the group that they're running. But that's what happens, earn the right to sit behind a desk. And it kills this, it'll kill it. It's a big part of why 80% fail. Right?
Remember what I said earlier about it's all about leadership and people? It's all leadership. All the rest of the stuff, these are just tools. And if you don't have the right leader and you don't have the right persona and you don't develop the people, it'll never work. It's a different way of managing. When my first office at Toyota, first time I ever got an office was when I became president. Seriously. And the only reason I got an office then is because I got some pretty confidential information sent to me, and I had to have a place I could secure it. Prior to that, when I was doing all these other, vice president this, vice president that, senior vice president this, open desk. We had a little cubicle around it, but the cubicle was maybe yay high to where anybody walking by could say, hey, Darryl, what's going on? Can you help me with this? Can you talk to me about that? The other thing is that when you're leading a lean initiative, you need to be able to identify muda or waste, and you got to be self-reflective enough to know that you're waste. And everybody, honestly speaking, I'm waste, Dave's waste, everybody in this room is waste. Because if it wasn't for the hard work and efforts of people generating a profit, we wouldn't have a livelihood and so forth. So you need to do everything you can to make the job as easy as you possibly can for the people that are actually touching the product and adding value to what you're really trying to do. Anything you can possibly do. Train them better materials, better work environment, better resources, better physical fitness, anything that you can think of to make them better and more valuable to do their jobs, you need to do it. But the other thing is it's a very positive thing. So when you're doing this, you're going to see some horrific examples of problem solving. And first time around, expect that. And that's okay because they're doing it. But you need to acknowledge the good things that they do and always be positive. And anytime, making problems visible is the most important thing you can do as a leader, and acknowledge people for making the problems visible. Don't say, oh, you can resolve that yourself. Why do you bring me something so stupid? They'll kill the whole program. You want people to bring problems up because only by bringing those problems up, you can put the resources to be able to resolve it and so forth.
That's another part of the leadership, though, that we do poorly in the U.S. is developmental feedback. I mean, I've had people quit on me when I thought I gave them a really good evaluation. I mean, part of the leader's responsibility is development and growth, and we're just not very comfortable doing that. I mean, you can just see it in many companies I work in really hard. It's easy in the consulting firm. Consulting firm, you have a shelf life of 2.5 years as a consultant. That's basically, if you have a young kid getting out of Harvard and going into McKinsey, they should expect a 3-year term because you treat them with a fire hose and they get all this great experience, but it's a very tough world and you're evaluated every 3 months or every project. So if a project's 1 month, 3 months, you're getting hit with, this is what you do well, put that aside, here's all the development points. And it's great if you accept it as something that's really powerful and good. It's one of the things I think Toyota didn't do very well, as opposed to GE did more on the extreme side. The bottom 10%, they're out the door next year. But if your leaders are sitting behind the desk, how are they out there doing development and growth? So I'd be sitting at my desk in the purchasing office in Toyota, and the most senior, either Darryl, who's done it to me a few times, or my Japanese sensei, Takakawa-san, would come up and say, Dave, let's go out into the middle of the plant. And literally at NUMMI, 2 million square foot, go out into some place in the middle of the plant and say, what do you see? And I knew I was being tested. How many opportunities can I see in this, whatever, spot welding equipment? And you rattle off 15 or 20, and they go, okay. And then they rattle off 100. And you go, okay, I have more learning to do, right? But I mean, that kind of leader that you want, that true mentor, as opposed to the names we kind of put on stuff. Like, okay, you're a leader in the organization. I had somebody say, I want to be, what was his description of this? I asked him what he wanted to be, and he said something like, I want to be a leader. And I said, there is no position called leader, here, right? And so what are the qualities of a leader we want in folks? And doing that little daily diary of how you spend your time is really effective to kind of look at, do we really have the right leadership running this thing, and how are you spending your time, and do you really know where you should spend your time?
When I was president, I spent 70% of my day out on the shop floor. 70%. I mean, I was constantly walking, and I exposed myself to as many people as I possibly could, because I wanted them complaining to me. I thought it was very important for them to complain to me, because if they're complaining to me, I can fix things. But if I'm sitting in my office, I don't know what's going on. The worst thing you can have happen in an organization is have them quit on you without leaving the company. Okay? No, you'd much rather have them quit and leave the door than sit around and be a complete non-participant in the organizational objectives and so forth. So I spent all my time on the floor, as much as I could. Yes, ma'am?
How do you get your people to actually interact with you? It's like every morning I hold a meeting, and I always ask for their opinions, or what I can do better, and I just don't know how to interact with
I never led the meetings. I had them lead them, and I had them every day. We have these things at Toyota. They got these things called FMDS. You guys don't know what FMDS is. FMDS stands for Floor Management Development System, and there's hundreds of these boards out on the plant floor. On the left side of the board is change point management. So man, machine, material, method. People calling in sick, new piece of equipment going online, maybe a new HR policy, that type of thing. So that's change point management. In the middle is in any plant you go to, it could be in Thai, it could be in Russia, it could be in China. Going from left to right, it's safety, quality, cost, human development, productivity. And then to the right are major projects and so forth. So I used to go to as many of those meetings as I could during the day. I just walked the plant. And there's only 3 reasons you do this. And you guys should write this down too, because if anybody there's 3 reasons why you do FMDS. Okay, the first problem is it makes everything visible. Everything is right there. The second thing is it's a method of communication. You can communicate the same message to a large group of people one time, one way. And the third thing, to your point, is it's a way for you as the leader to apply and allocate resources to resolve problems that they don't have the wherewithal to do. So when you're sitting in there and they're leading this effort and they're talking about some major issue like his dirt example, I sent him into a spray booth. He was going to come solve a dirt issue. Well, dirt's been around since, God knows how long. Well, it's God, right? And he was going to solve my dirt issue. I told him to go stand in the spray booth, and I want you to stand there all day long and evaluate it. Now, he's probably getting a little bit high from the paint fumes and so forth.
A lot of it.
But he was able to figure out using, doing Genji Genbutsu, his eyes and his sense of smell and his hearing, that we did not have a dirt problem based upon paint. We had a dirt problem because certain paint showed the dirt more than the other. We had the same amount of dirt on every vehicle. And I don't mean a lot of dirt. I mean maybe, 5 pieces?
Yeah,
Not much. But you want them to talk. And if we're having a meeting right here and I go through boomity, 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 boom, you guys got anything? rarely will anybody have anything. But if you're leading the meeting and you're talking about some major issue you've got, and you say, I've been working on this for 3 weeks, and I listen as a leader, and I think, she's doing the right thing here, she's doing the right thing there, and you say, I could really resolve this, but I don't have an electrical engineer, and I don't have a couple of maintenance guys. I do. So I can supply you with those resources and say, okay, Brian, I want you to give her 2 maintenance people. Dave, I want you to give her 2 electrical engineers. 2 weeks from now, what's your name? Tina. 2 weeks from now, Tina, I want you guys to report out on what you were able to do to be able to resolve the issue and so forth. So have them talk to you. And don't talk much. You don't need to talk. In the FMDS boards, I already know all that stuff. I could look on a computer report and figure it out. The important thing is not for me to know that. It's for them to see me on the shop floor and encourage them to resolve the issues that they need to do.
Just some of the, just the reality of this stuff. If you go, I've seen, I called it Star Wars effect. Guys will see, your team will see that lights, signals, boards, and all these things are lean, and then you have it everywhere, and it's meaningless. It's kind of like, the data thing. Data in is only, your data out's only as good as your data in kind of thing. So there is still a structure you have to give to the teams to be able to do those conversations. So I like to do those one-on-one, because people, no one wants to speak. We all know it's the number one thing, even above death, dying, is speaking in front of a group. So realizing that, and a lot of those folks don't do it, I pull them aside and say, here's how I would run them. I literally do dry runs with them on the first couple. Like, look, this is how I would have presented this data that you have. Here's how I would present it with the board, and here's what the board's supposed to do for you. And if you have the board and it's not saving you time, then you need to change it. And so the point of the boards is it should be very quick. You should be able to do a 5-minute meeting.
Yeah.
5 minutes to get through a meeting. And that's lost sometimes. Well, we got the board and we spent an hour speaking, on all these great topics. You're like, really? So what came out of it? And why is there, 50 people at the meeting? Are those the right 50 people to have, or should you only have 5? So all those things that are behind the scenes that you would want folks to do to figure out, how do you have an effective meeting? Besides, hey, we have a nice shiny board and it's visual and we're doing the right thing because we're up as a group speaking to the board, right? So there's a lot of things to make it really work that you want to spend a little time on.
There's 2 other important things. When you do these performance boards, you're going to have your KPIs and your trend charts and all your Six Sigma stuff, right? But we spend 10% of the time on that. 90% of the time we spend on the activities, because the charts and graphs are just history, right? It's already done. You can't do anything about it. But the process is what you want to put all your effort into. The other thing is we color code everything red, yellow, and green. Red means no good. Yellow means with a little effort you can get it green. And green means it's a great condition and so forth. So in these meetings, if it's green, we don't talk about it. If it's yellow, we don't talk about it. The only thing we talk about are the reds. So that's how we're able to get through a lot of these meetings in a very short period of time. But as a leader and as an American, what you got to be cognizant of is people want to tell you all the really super good things they're doing, and you need to shift the focus away from that and say, okay, these are green, they're supposed to be green, that's what we're being paid for. Let's talk about the red. But you have to do that in a very positive manner. And that's how you can get through these meetings in a very short period of time.
So we're mindful of the time. We'll try to get through some of these pretty quickly, but just to give you some of the flavor again of the basics behind lean. You hear this a lot. We've talked about it. Looking at people, process, and material information. Anytime you see variability on the lean side, any variability is opportunity. That's how it's looked at. Any waste, opportunity. Everything's looked at. It's positive on the negative. That if we have bad stuff going on, that's a good thing because we have improvement opportunity. So all the system losses, and we're looking at quality, cost, and delivery. Straightforward, but I generally just use a return. There's a return on everything, or I don't do it. We talked about 5S, cleaning up an area, and we'll get into that a little later. I don't let anybody do that. They have to earn the right to do that. If you're gonna tell me by doing that you save safety or save cost, great, let's go do it. But there's a return, so everything's on a return basis. If we're getting shortened lead time, I actually talked to a company, they wanted to go from a 15-day lead time to a 1-day lead time. Because that's better. 1 day is better than 15. Well, is it? Are you going to save money? Are you going to get more customers because now you're able to deliver in one day? You're competing against China. They have to ship it. So, what's the expectation of your customers? How diverse are they? So are you going to be able to eliminate those warehouses by having one day and change your delivery process? Maybe, but I'm just asking the questions. I'm being stupid here, but just help me out. So is there a return on all the things that you're doing? Again, waste, variability, and flexibility. Any deviation of variability, and there's a waste we'll talk about, and if the flexibility, a flexible workforce, a flexible process is what's going to drive value for it, then you go after it. But it's wanting to make sure every person in the company is actually studying this. Has everybody seen this waste description or auxiliary work, waste, and value-added activity? I called it the peace sign at Toyota, as Darryl talked about, with the 50 people. And anytime we went out to a job site and did an analysis, it was always shaped as the peace sign on how much was value added, the biggest chunk, a bit of auxiliary work of opening boxes and whatnot, and pure waste, walking, waiting, these kinds of things, and we'll go into that. So having folks understand that's the visualness, looking, observation, learning to see, all these kinds of things, is just understanding when I look at something, is it wasteful? Our job, wasteful. I talked about it in my company as the VP of lean. How much waste is that? You shouldn't need that in a company. If you're a VP in Toyota, it's assumed already that you have the knowledge of what waste is and driving improvement, and you don't need a efficiency expert. What you're trying to get to. So we'll leave the 8th waste on here, although Darryl and I don't agree with it. I don't know, has everybody seen the 7 waste, 8 waste? The one that shouldn't be on there, any debate? No, we'll have it. But overproduction, producing too much or producing too soon. Overprocessing, shining the lug nuts that are covered by the wheel cover. Doing any kind of rework. So all that rework, I talked about 80% doing rework. I mean, does it add value? Well, you shouldn't have done it in the first place. Any excess motion or motion is waste. Inventory, having too much. But again, there's a big red X, bless you. There's a big red X whenever you talk about inventory and lean, right? This big inventory is bad. And yes, it has a carrying cost and you have damage to it potentially, or you overproduced. But sometimes it makes you more value in the end. If you look at the Toyota plant, we were just talking about this, producing a vehicle every 60 seconds, and we're not producing any more than we need to, right? Well, not really, because the vehicles go out and they're distributed in different port facilities that can hold 12,000 vehicles on the lot, and that buffer is between the dealerships and the Toyota plant, and it's really costly to have a Toyota plant fluctuating, but having the ports fluctuate saves money. So you can do that until you can have a direct line to the customer and actually produce as needed the vehicles. Any waiting on a product. So these are all things that Toyota tries to make sure that people have in the back of their mind, the training they get before they walk out there. These are all the things that I want you to see as wasteful. So when Dave's doing his door assembly and the window install, and he has to walk back to the rack to get his parts, that walking is pure waste. There's nothing being done to generate value on that vehicle, turning the wrench. But usually you don't see that. So that's the thing that you want everybody to see. And the one that we debate is this intellect, because clearly you're giving them all the capabilities to leverage their intellect. And the whole people pillar is about leveraging your workforce. But most put it up there, so we make sure we have it. And McKinsey, we put it up there too, because of course all we bring to the table is intellect, so we better put it up there.
Do you guys know which is the worst waste?
No.
Which one? Yeah, it's the worst one, and it creates all the other 6. Yes, ma'am.
What's the difference between overproduction and inventory?
Oh, inventory between processes. So within as he was talking about, within a plant, you want to minimize the amount of inventory you hold within that plant, and you want to minimize the amount of buffer size between processes. So what you do is it's actually a calculation based upon your efficiency level and your quality rate, which dictates, and your tack time, which dictates what your selectivity bank size is. And what you do is you reduce that as small as you possibly can before you short the next process, and then you raise it back to what it was before, and then you do Kaizen to be able to lower the water. And then the other portion of that, the inventory aspect, is you reduce the amount of supplier inventory that you have in-house. So for instance, in a vehicle plant, you would probably, most major parts, you would have no more than 4 hours of inventory. Tires, you would have 1 truckload, and then they would have trucks coming from a tire and wheel outfit a little ways away.
But if the target for the shift is 500 vehicles and you produce 600, that's overproducing.
Yeah.
But you had 10,000 vehicles worth of plastic door panels. That's the inventory side versus the overproduction side of it. It's easier in a maintenance shop for inventory, because maintenance, if you look at how many pumps you have as inventory, any one of them is too much inventory, but did they do the analysis around how often do we have a pump failure and how quickly do we get a pump back, and it costs this much so of downtime if we don't have it, so we've designed our inventory to cover that. If they've done that, but it's still inventory waste, nothing to do with production, right? It's harder when it's just the,
Question about that.
Yeah.
Is overprocessing, how is it different from the quality beyond what's required?
yeah, so you'd have to design, like, what is the customer expectation? We design that quality in. It has to meet this level of torque on that lug nut, if we go back to the lug nut. This is the torque requirement between this range and this range. And the quality of that lug nut, the strength of the lug, does it rust, all that stuff would be designed into the supplied part. But do I care, say, which view of that nut shows up to me as I'm looking at it, or that it's been polished and doesn't have any dust on it, and I have somebody cleaning those off, and then I cover it with right?
Yeah.
So, there is a level of quality expectation, but you could have too much quality too. You could be designing things that customers don't care about. A good example is, well, we have this high-level product. Well, let's take the Lexus versus the Corolla. And say we did the same soundproofing on the Corolla as we did the Lexus. Well, the Lexus customer's expecting 0 wind noise, right? Corolla customer's not. They don't expect it, and you're still paying for that additional cost in the Corolla. And there are, we just talked about an example this morning where this particular client was providing the same high-level cost of materials for their high-level product as they were for their low-level product, with a completely different expectation. So in that case, that's overprocessing designed in. But most of it's just the simple stuff of you're just doing too much, unnecessary, and largely it's that lazy person we talked about that's not doing it. They're like, that doesn't make any sense to do that. Why would I do that? Wipe the window off, wipe the little smear, or whatever it is. So, but you'll hear about all of the 8 wastes. I'm not going to go into this one since we did it already.
Overproduction, we have a customer that we build per their contract. We have our tack rate, but also in their contract they have a 6-week window where they can pull in product from a later date. How do you try to compensate? I've always tried to, let's build some into our finished goods. They want to build 2 contracts. But I said, well, when they call it pull in, then we're in a scramble.
Well, we would, speaking on behalf of, we wouldn't do that. So if you want to change the contract, we do have a couple instances where we have some big customers like rent-a-car companies that do that, but they pay a penalty for that. So we're going to pay for expediting fees and that type of thing. We would build that into the buffer based upon a calculation of probability of how often that happened. So we have this thing called Hejunka. You guys know what Hejunka means? No? Hejunka means levelizing production. So you need like 2 things. You need standardized work and you need level production. Those are 2 fundamental foundations for doing lean activities and so forth. So even if you swag it, David, that swag is a heck of a lot better than building in the huge buffer size and so forth. And you do it based upon historical probability. You're going to make mistakes, but that's okay. It's going to happen. But err on the side of not carrying enough inventory rather than carrying too much, because there's a obsolescence issue that comes into play there as well. Okay, this one here is this Taiichi Ono. He's the guy that took over Toyota when they went bankrupt, and then this is Mr. Cho. Cho's now chairman of the board. Cho's a great guy. Cho was the first president we had of the Kentucky plant there. Cho and Nampucha Hiyashi are the only two living students of Mr. Ono and so forth. The Cho is a gregarious, fun-loving guy, likes to drink, maybe sometimes too much he likes to drink, but he's known for spending about 95% of his time out on the shop floor just talking to people. Shop floor guy, and a great individual, I think, real nice guy.
That earn the right to a desk thing is so evident when you go through a Toyota plant versus others. And I talked about removing all the desks or all the offices in the company I was at. First thing the new person did was put an office in. And it's just defeating on that interaction that you want to have between folks, of just walk up to the desk, talk about a problem. Now sometimes that's an issue, right, as well as the time that you take as a senior leader. But if you're spending 95% of the time out there where value is being created, you can avoid that as well.
Should I tell them about the A3 and the $821 million bucks?
Oh, we'll get to that one.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So some of the things just for the purposes of, I don't understand where each of your companies are in your process of implementing lean. So this is just a little bit of flavor of trying to avoid being that 80%, some of these slides. So, do we have the rigorous architecture for driving this thing forward? Do we have a plan that we're rolling out and have very specific goals? I can't even see it now, performance and health on the second one. Do we really know what metrics we should be tracking? The health of the organization is a bit about this employee morale. Do we really know what drives people's behaviors? Have we picked it right? Do we have the right aspirations and pace? How aggressive are we? Have that conversation every time we do a budget meeting, right? I talked to Darryl about, you're in Toyota and you expect a 25% improvement every year. Expectation of the leader is that kind of number. What you build in the budget is different. And it's very hard to get those two concepts separated in that conversation. I've been in it. Like, well, I'm going to put down 7%, 5% improvement, but I'm going to shoot for 25%. My team is going to have the expectations of 25%, but I'm going to build it, and we'll talk about later, with very actual things that we're going to do to reap it. I'm not just going to pick a 10% number out of the sky. I'm going to do a diagnostic with my team. My team's going to do it. We're going to study all the opportunities, and we're going to really know what the aspirations is of doing this transformation. What's required for us to be a stronger company, be here in 10 years, whatever it is, as Toyota had its aspirations from the early days, and then go after a very tangible impact early, even if it's small. So I would pick something that's meaningful to the folks, on my team that I'm trying to convince we should do this. One example is fork trucks. Our plant had 130 fork trucks. And that was, 5% of the asset value that drove about 20% of our cost, just in the fork trucks. The repairs, the rental, everybody wants their own fork truck in their own department, no shared resource. And if you go through the Toyota world, it was run like a taxi stand. We dispatched fork trucks. They were on their routes. They had a very specific timetable. There was none of this randomness going on. And so we took out half the fork trucks. We could have taken out another 40%. We took out half of them, and in a 3-month time frame. Then people are like, okay, I get it. These concepts of looking at what drives value, of putting routes on fork trucks, thinking about production control is meaningful, so maybe we'll pay attention a little more. So grab the tangible impact early, make change personal. That's the one that you can't see in the dark. Make it personal. Everybody has, the what's in it for me factor really does matter. Right? I mean, what makes me come to work every day? What do I care about? It has to be personal at the end of the day. It has to be something that's going to make me want to do this. So make it personal for people. We talked about the leadership focus, and manage the journey is that last one. Again, staying on top of what it is that we're going to need to do to move this thing, because it's not going to stay as we expected it to from day one. It's going to change every year, and be willing to to play with that, with those differences that are going to come up. I don't know what I keep pressing here, but I need to, let me go through this. So this is the 80% fail kind of chart. You know, what are the things you see when, you know, you can either force them into it or take forever to do it. You know, if you want to be Toyota in 1 year, that ain't going to happen, right? That's not reality. But you can do a very aggressive pace, and there's a complete difference between going the private equity kind of turnaround aggressive approach. I mean, you can get super aggressive and just shove it down people's throats and make it happen, or you can do the take forever and collaborate with everyone. And you got to find that middle ground. With my team doing the last 5 years, we did about 40% improvement. And my team's return, the way I judged my team's performance was pure return on my budget. And where we would get to is, okay, we have this extreme and this one. And if we're going to pick this sustainable change, at some point the leader has to know what needs to be done. There are going to be some leaps of faith that you're going to have to say, look, just do it. It's the right thing to do, and we'll learn as we go. And there was a number of those things that we had to do. You're just going to have to make those choices. So make sure the pace is right. That first one, lack of leadership involvement and follow through. The talent, adjusting your talent. So really knowing this isn't just, hey, we've got people that need to go. This is also, do we have people in the right positions, and are we giving them the right kind of development opportunities, and where do they sit with that? You know, your central improvement team group can't take over this. It can't be, you know, your TPS group that does all this stuff. That is in our 3,000 people in NUMMI. We have 4 to 6 people.
No, 5,700.
Okay, 5,700.
Yeah.
I left at 3. 5,700 people. So 6,000 people. That's right. I would say 6,000 people. 6 were on the improvement team. So clearly, they weren't running the show, but they were targeted at very specific opportunities. They were involved in the training, but literally the expectation was the people on the line were doing this. So you can't let the improvement team take over. You need to make sure you have the right improvement targets. They're achievable, they're stretching, but they're based on knowledge of what it could be. You're not integrating the program, the approach to transformation into the management processes. The way we talked about it is doing this lean thing is really fed into the actual budgeting process. So there's no difference between the two, doing lean versus running the company. We're doing this to drive performance. So when we do the budgeting process, we're going to do an analysis across all these tools and techniques and systems that we'll get into, and we're going to design it into individual managers' roles. So when we supported a different company, it was the reliability manager was running the reliability work stream. The production control leader was running the production control group with the improvement team supporting it. And then manufacturing only. So I could have improved the processing plant threefold from a numbers perspective, but there was tenfold out there by working with sales and marketing, looking at SKU complexity and the cost of different products. So I can go buy a new piece of equipment, drive equipment performance, and do all this great productivity, and it's trumped by just spending a bit of time on the other end of product development and sales and marketing activities instead of just manufacturing. So you really need to make sure you involve that time with everybody, and then just how much time is really focused on this people dimension. You know, do you spend enough time on it? So we putting this up for context of there's a lot of programs out there. If you look at the development, and we talked about the Toyota's world, there's an offshoot of kind of lean and an offshoot of lean or Six Sigma. And at the end of the day, they're very similar in what they're trying to accomplish. We've kind of talked about that. Motorola and GE being a couple that really pushed the Six Sigma approach. So some of these similarities, if you look at Six Sigma, and a lot of the positives in common language, scalable infrastructure, fact-based rigor, and I can't even read on the lean side. Yeah, holistic system. They talk about easy, simple, visual, frontline focused. Whereas Six Sigma, typical shortfall, it's project based. You know, how many projects have I done? What belt do I have? Elitist, rigor, the rigid process. You know, can't go outside of this process that we have. KPI might be disconnected to the process, and the lean shortfalls is difficult to understand, the difficult to scale, all these things. So, but at the end of the day, you're looking at these two, and you're just saying, well, what is it that I can pull from this that I should put into my organization? And that's why I said the zealot thing doesn't help, because there's positives in both of what different companies are doing, and that's why I pushed the GE performance feedback was so much better than what I got at Toyota. You know, just talking to how much performance feedback and expectation on performance that the general person got was a little bit more rigor on the GE side as opposed to Toyota. But that doesn't matter. I mean, Toyota's doing it now. It's looking at it and saying, what do we need to do to be more aggressive? And we talked a little bit about this. You see everything on the top, the tools, the visual things that you see when you walk through the company, as opposed to what do you don't see, the systems, the performance culture, the guiding principles and systems that are actually making this work. So we're going to go into some of that. So this is how I've kind of, with McKinsey, have summarized kind of what is the house that you should erect. You know, Toyota has its house, everybody has their house. I talked about this a little bit. There's three things that we generally see that really good best practice companies have a grasp of. The bottom left here is technical systems. So it's technical systems, management systems, mindsets, and behaviors. So culture, management, and technical. Technical, everybody spends all their time in, right? This is the maintenance, the labor productivity, your equipment performance, your production control, quality, you know, all that stuff that all the tools are kind of largely focused on. You get a little bit more into the management systems. That's your performance heat map, it's organizational design, it's performance dialogue, goal setting, things like that. But culture is the one that generally missed. You know, and I talk about this when we go in and evaluate. We do the fuzzy knee knocking, which is two people sitting together talking about what irks you. You know, what's the problem of working here? Well, I've had, you know, there's been 40 name changes on the wall since I've worked here. So this is just one more program that I have to listen to. So it's the way people feel and think, and then there's all the tools that support that. So we're going to go into a couple, but let me just pause there for a minute. I know I ripped through that stuff, just mindful of time. Is there any questions before we go into some of the basic tools? And really, we're just going to give you a snapshot of them. I mean, you could spend, like I said, you know, with Toyota, 5 one-week-long courses to get trained in standard work, and we're going to give you three slides on it. So just so you've seen it, you've heard about it, we've hit the key points. But is there any questions?
What's the, so we're gonna do this for another 5 or 10 minutes, and then break or whatever. I just wanna give people some expectations and stuff. I see people are trickling a little bit.
Yeah, well, we meant to be done in 5 minutes. I think we'll get through the tools in 5 minutes. We could take a break at 2:30 if you want. 10-minute break at 2:30?
Break at 2:30? Okay.
Okay. So I just listed some of the tools that are up there. OEE, has everybody heard, or anybody heard OEE, Overall Equipment Effectiveness? I love this tool, actually. This is one that I use as my main performance metric in the plant. Overall equipment performance basically says, when I look at a piece of equipment, I look at it for 100% of the time. I have it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That's my utilization opportunity. I have all that time. And now when I look at how efficient it is, I say, when I ask it to run, how long does it run? That's, at the end of the day, that's it. Forget all the other stuff. But OEE breaks it down and says, okay, if I have 10 hours that I'm actually asking it to run, I have the first 2 losses are potentially availability losses, where management decisions or changeover activity, right? I do a changeover, I lose time, or I just have some mechanical downtime. So I lose this availability. Now I'm down to a next chunk of time, 8 hours, 8 hours left. Now I have performance losses. I have a bunch of small stops, and I have speed losses. I'm not running it at the technical rate of that equipment. So I have additional losses. Now I'm down to, say, 6 hours of time that I'm actually running product on that when I look at the 10 hours. Now I have scrap and rework losses. So I've produced stuff, but I had to rework it later, or I just threw it away. So that, I shouldn't count that as good performance of the equipment. So now I'm down to 4 hours, so it's a 40% OEE number, overall performance. And it's a very clean way of looking at everything that happens, my quality, my engineering, my labor productivity, my maintenance team. If they had to spend an hour on that piece of equipment, I lost an hour working on it for maintenance. That's availability losses, and I come out with that 40% number. So I like that one. It's a very easy one to understand, but it's like all these tools, it's a way of problem solving. They all came up as a way of problem solving. So I want to look at equipment performance. I use this to kind of Pareto out where my issues are. And if I have 50% of my time spent in changeovers, I guess I should focus on changeovers and use a tool like SMED, single minute exchange of die, we'll go into. Then 5S, area effectiveness, organizing a room for efficiency and safety. Standard work, we talked about problem solving, visual management, fail-safe devices, Jidoka, A3 report writing. We're going to talk about A3 report writing. We're going to talk about problem solving, standard work, 5S, and SMED, just to give you a little flavor. If there's other tools you guys have heard about and you want to make sure we cover, just raise them. We'll try to cover it the time we have. Okay, I've got 5 minutes, Darryl, before we break them. I'm going to go into a couple. So I don't know, Darryl, if you want to go through the problem-solving ones. I know you're 8 or 9 now instead of 6, but jump in. The core of Toyota really is their problem-solving approach. I actually prefer Six Sigma's DMAIC because it's just easy to remember. Define, measure, analyze, improve, control. Simple for people to understand. A little more difficult when you go through plan, do, check, act, but it's the same general sense of, do we have a structured problem-solving approach for every person in the company to be following? So here's the 6. Define the problem, analyze the problem, generate some solutions, prioritize those set of solutions, pick one and implement it, and then figure out 6, did it work? And if it didn't, go back again. But not much different than define, analyze the problem, measure it, define, measure, analyze, improve, implement it, and control it. I mean, the basis is, do you have a structured way of solving problems and teaching people the problem-solving approach? So
Toyota does 8-step problem solving. The one that we added is root cause analysis. And the reason why we do the root cause analysis is when we do the 8-step problem solving, the theory is if we get to the root cause, implement a long-term countermeasure, we only have to resolve each problem one time in its life. So, I remember when I worked at GM, we were solving the same problem every month. So we never solved it.
Yeah, one of the first jobs I had was reporting out the repetitive problems. And we cared more about the repetitive problems than we did the big problem of the day, right? So a little flavor for it on the planning. Again, we talked about you might plan too much, but when you're defining the problem, as somebody, I'm okay with anybody coming up and talking about a problem. You should be as a leader in the organization, but have you actually defined what that problem is, or are you just venting? I don't want venting, but I'm certainly happy to hear if you've defined what the problem is, and let's talk through it. So define it in a very specific way. There's lots of little tools you can use of critical to quality, voice of the customer, some brainstorming. Is it just a motivational thing? Has performance management shown us this? Simple problem-solving statement. Do you have this in your organization where you walk people through how do you put a problem statement together? Maybe you use, and we'll go into it a little bit, the value stream mapping exercise where you map out the entire process, and that shows you where there's some big heat marks. There's too many people or quality issues, defects, whatnot. Then your analysis, making sure, yeah, this 80-20 rule, don't boil the ocean, focus on the things that matter, get to some good understanding using Pareto or scatter charts, checklists, control charts. You could use spaghetti diagrams, a lot of different tools folks can use. And then, figure out, what kinds of solutions might work here. So we're going to generate a bunch of solutions, leave nothing off the table before we get to let's select some, prioritize and plan the implementation. So we go through some idea of what works, and you can use this basic framework, right? Well, is it difficulty or ease of implementation versus impact? How much trouble do I have to go through to implement this idea, and how much is it going to get me? And then implement it. Go do, and make sure it worked. And if it did work, then we're going to create a standard way of doing this now. We're not going to let it fall back to how it was in the past.